Good afternoon. Welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee. Before we start these proceedings, can I just bring to your attention some housekeeping? There's no expected fire alarm test today, so if it sounds, please follow the fire and emergency procedures that apply to the Council House. Can I ask that you use your microphone when addressing the meeting and that it is switched off while you're not using it, and also that your mobile devices are turned to silent. This meeting will be broadcast live on the internet and capable of subsequent repeated viewing. By entering this room and during the course of the meeting, councillors are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those recordings for webcasting. So without further ado, I'll move to the first agenda item, which is to note the appointment of the Chair and Vice Chair for the municipal year 2023 to 24. No?
Go on, just this one. Yeah, you're okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So to note the appointment of myself, Councillor Sarah Allen as Chair and Councillor Lee Finn as Vice Chair for the year 2023 to 24. That's noted, thank you. Next item is apologies. Have we received any?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Item number 4 is the minutes of the last meeting, which I wasn't part of, but hopefully you've all had a chance to have a look at the meeting minutes. Yeah. Are there any? Okay, any objections? No? Okay, those meeting minutes can be accepted as a true and accurate record. Chair's urgent business. Members should be aware that the Council delegated to the Audit and Governance Committee the design and implementation of the consultation, in particular who would be consulted and engaged with and how. Last year, members of this committee met to discuss the proposals for this consultation. Before the committee finalises their approach and taking into account advice of officers, I'd like to propose that the consultation is brought back to the committee following discussions with Southampton City Council, who have recently been through the same process. Any questions?
Through you, Chair, just to confirm, this is reference the electoral cycle consultation and electoral review. And Southampton have recently undergone a very similar process in respect of electoral review, and we'd very much like to take some time to speak to them before we conduct any further consultation.
Councillor Lowry?
I note from the minutes, strange, note from the minutes we have plans to commence the consultation on the 5th of June. Obviously that's not going to happen, but equally it was the intention for this committee to report back to the next council meeting, which would be in September. Is that still an achievable objective, please? Or not, as the case may be?
Chair, through you. I think obviously there's been a change of administration since the Audit Committee had their deliberations, and I think certainly there's a view, I speak of Cabinet, Councillor Larry, of which you are a member, that Southampton is a good example of a council that has undergone an electoral review with the Boundary Commission. They asked the question about electoral cycles as part of their consultation on their electoral review undertaken by the Boundary Review. So they rolled the two things together. The issue also was raised of, and I don't want to, I mean, I think the Audit and Governance Committee will be involved in the electoral review, so it's probably better if I get used to some of the detail of it now. One of the conditions, one of the issues that the Boundary Commission will raise with Plymouth is that if a council is to continue to have elections by thirds, then that has a potential impact on the number of councillors who are allocated to each of the revised, if they are revised wards as a result of the electoral review. The idea being that the number should be divisible by 3 if a council continues to elect by thirds. And as I think all members will be aware, 3 of our wards have 2 members. We've had some initial conversations with Southampton about this, who don't have any 2-member wards, and it's not a requirement that all numbers of councillors in each ward should be divisible by 3. It's seen as a standard that should be applied where necessary. So there are a number of issues connected with this. It was certainly felt that the potential impact of the electoral review, which is fixed, that the council will first engage with the Boundary Commission over at the end of this year, as you'll have noticed in previous papers, that this should be considered in detail prior to committing to a public consultation, which obviously the results of which will need to be properly considered by the council. So I think it would be more sensible for this committee to commit to reporting back to the council in September with the outcome of those conversations, both with the Boundary Commission for England and also with Southampton as a council who's just completed and enacted its electoral review, rather than commit to public consultation prior to the September meeting. One other piece of information for the committee, the Chief Executive did have an initial conversation with the Chief Executive of the Boundary Commission. The Council would not need to commit its intentions over the electoral cycle with the Boundary Commission until June of 2024 as part of the process. So that absolute critical path requirement to complete consultation during this summer has been lifted slightly as a result of that information from the Boundary Commission. So I don't think there's any significant disadvantage of not meeting the deadline, apart from the requirement to report back to council about that. But in terms of either the electoral review or further decision making by the council about its electoral cycle in advance of the electoral review, I don't think there are any significant implications from that delay. I hope that's helpful, if somewhat complicated.
Great, Giles, very happy with that. Can I ask, Chair, that you do endeavour to keep us informed as a committee as to the progress of this item? I'm not entirely sure when our next meeting is, so I would like us to be fully, obviously we'll have to meet before the September full council, but if there is information in the interim that comes from the Southampton visit, then please keep us informed as to progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Larry. I think we can do that. Councillor Dr Mahoney.
Thank you, Chair. I think Giles has probably answered my concerns, but I was just worried whether we were going to run out of time over the electoral cycle issue and consultation before we had to really think about what the boundaries were going to be and whether we were going to have 2 or 3 member wards. I mean, we were going to do this consultation last summer at one point, so it's already slipped a year. So it now looks like it's going to slip another 3 months or more. So, you know, we're not going to run out of time, are we? Hopefully.
As I said, we took due regard of that risk, hence the conversation with the Boundary Commission, at which point the early reports that you saw indicated the first point of the contact that the council was going to have with the Boundary Commission, which is December of this year. And the Boundary Commission has confirmed that's very much an introduction to the process and a meeting with the key political leaders. It's not the point at which the council has to commit, which has been confirmed as next June. And then the other tiny detail on top of this, there isn't a requirement that councils elected by thirds have 3 members in each ward. It's purely that the Boundary Commission have to have due regard for this during the review. But in answer to the substance of your question, John, we still have until next June before we have to confirm to the Boundary Commission.
Thank you. Any further questions? All those in favour? Yeah, that's carried. So now move on to item 6, which is the external audit and the progress report. And I'm going to ask Paul Dossett from Grant Thornton to present this report. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. And before I talk through the report, I'd just like to introduce my colleague on the screen, John Roberts. John, as I will explain later, John is taking over the audit from me after the completion of the 1920 audit, and John will give a bit of an introduction after I've covered this particular item. And I'm conscious as well, Chair, that there's a few new members on this committee, and this is the first page 24 of your pack, where we summarise the issue, is a very short summary, and I recognise for some members they may not be fully aware of the detail of the issue. So forgive me, I'll just do a bit of a potted history to get to where we are now. Back in 2019, the council undertook a transaction that was designed to reduce the pension deficit and the impact of the contributions to the pension deficit on the general fund. It's a pressure that a lot of councils have had over the years, and obviously council budgets, both now and back then, were in a tight position. And the transaction basically involved a purchase of shares, and then the use of that money to reduce the pension fund deficit. Now that transaction took place in 1920. From an accounting point of view, we as the auditors didn't agree with the council's approach to that transaction, and we had a series of discussions around that. And the council then agreed at that time that wasn't the right accounting. Alongside that, we had a review, or we did, as part of our value for money work, we did a review of the governance around making decisions around sort of complex and innovative schemes. We carried out that review in the early summer of 2021, reported back to Audit Committee, and Council put in a new process to deal with that. So that issue has been addressed in terms of the processes that you put in place to deal with innovative schemes. So the governance side of that issue has been addressed, but where we were on the accounting was the council took advice on the accounting treatment from SIPFA, and we didn't quite agree with that advice. Alongside that, both ourselves and the council have taken considerable legal advice on how the transaction should be accounted for and the legality of various decisions around it. We got to a place earlier this year where the two legal parties, the two legal advisors to both ourselves and the council, got to an agreed position, I think, but it did involve further discussions with the pension fund and further complications with the pension fund. So where that leaves us at this particular juncture is that the council have accounted for in their 1920 accounts, the transaction in a way that spreads the cost of the investment, or not the investment, the paying down of the pension deficit over probably over a 20-year period, and we don't think that's the right accounting. So that's where we are at the moment. We have had discussion with officers, and I think we are moving towards a conclusion. And obviously, the Section 151 officer can comment as needed shortly. We are moving to conclusion on this, hopefully in the near future. And I think it's quite important that we do, because clearly this audit has been open for a long time, and clearly it's not appropriate or right governance for audits to be left open for a long time. And of course, some of you may be aware of the government's latest initiative, and the Minister Lee Rowley has written to all councils about the government's proposals to deal with the backlog of audits, which is Plymouth is one of many. In fact, it's one of 600 audits that I think are currently in a backlog, and so there's a desire to sort of move this to a close. There are different solutions. I've sort of outlined them here a bit in terms of what different decisions the council could take, but that's obviously for the council to ultimately decide. We're very, very keen to close this matter off in the next few weeks, so that we can move on to the subsequent years and really move on with the audit process, which I think is very important. One of the things I have to consider as the auditor is the original investment in the pension transaction, because the way the council is currently accounting for the pension fund, whilst we might not agree with the accounting treatment per se, it's a treatment that one could see the value for money argument on it, whereas previously there was a cost to the council for that investment in shares. So we're looking at some of those issues around that. But the most important and immediate thing is to try and close this audit out and move on to the 2021 audit, which my colleague John will talk about in a minute. But that's where we are on the 1920 accounts. The value for money work for 1920, 2021 and 21-22 has all been completed and reported to this committee. So on that side of things, we're up to date. Probably, Chair, the rest of the report is just a sort of broader update, and I was happy to take any questions on those. I think probably best before I sort of introduce John to talk, if there's any particular questions on what I've just said from members, obviously happy to take them.
Got a question from Councillor Finn, but before that, you made reference to the Section 151 officer. So, David, can I just ask you for your comments, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul. Yeah, so it seems a long time ago, doesn't it? 2019, when this transaction went through the books. We have been working, I wouldn't want anybody to think we just sat on our laurels and letting it fester. So we are working in the background to clear this, and I'm as keen as Grant Thornton to move on. It is a particular local issue, but it's also sort of bogged down into the national issues as well. So there've been infrastructure issues and assets and all sorts of different things going on. So it's not as if we've been just sat waiting for this particular item and transaction to be sorted, but we have reached what I called an impasse, and I think we are both in agreement that we need to make a decision and move on. So just to give you some assurance, just before I went on holiday, I was having conversations with the actuary, straight into the actuary themselves, to see what help we could get from them, and ongoing discussions with Devon County Council as the administrators of the pension fund. So there are, as Paul has pointed out, maybe 2, maybe 3 different routes that we could take. So I think I'm at the point now of just setting those out and making sure that we all understand the decision that we come to, and then once we've agreed what we're going to do, then it'll go back to Grant Thornton to make their opinion on that. But we are absolutely assured that we are moving forward to try and get this resolved.
Thank you. So I'll now bring in Councillor Finn. You had a question?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether this is more of a part 2 question, but what is the potential deficit? Point 1, where do the conflicts lie between ourselves and the auditor? And is the pension sustainable in its current model? Chair.
Thank you. Paul, if I could ask you to answer that.
Well, I think on the pension deficit and commentary on how the council is managing that in broad terms, I'll probably leave to the Section 151 officer. the conflict is one of accounting treatment. We have one view about how the pension fund, the payment into the pension fund should be discharged, and the council has, and with advice, the council has a different view, and that's where the conflict is. The amounts concerned are material to the accounts, so where an item is material, the auditor has to pursue their line of thinking, and obviously, if the council was, well, this is just an audit process thing. If an audited body chooses not to amend the accounts, which the auditor thinks are materially wrong, then the process is an audit qualification. But that's a judgment call for the council to make in terms of how it takes this forward.
So if I just to sort of reiterate a little bit, there are different options available to us, which might mean that the accounts are qualified, or we go down a directive with the DLUCH and so on. Yes. So we've got different options. So basically, it's not unusual for a council to try and protect their payments by, when they get a 3-year valuation, to pay off the 3 years upfront at a discount in order to get benefit from that. What we chose to do was find a way of actually saying pension deficits normally run for 20 years. What would that amount to? So we got the £72 million price tag back, and we found a way of actually paying that off in one go. Okay. So the difference of opinion is, we're saying it started its life as a capital transaction because we'd had a company set up and so on. What Grant Thornton was saying is, no, you paid 72 million in that year. You need to account for it in 1 year. Yes. So in other words, that's where, as Paul has alluded to, the council advice that we both got separately started conflicting. So whichever way you look at the argument, you can see right on both sides. And absolutely. So in terms of your question about ongoing, etc., we are still quite confident that what we've done is saving the taxpayer money in terms of the cost of furnishing that debt, in other words. Yes. Yeah, so what we're down to now is a very technical issue about the accounting treatment and what course of action Plymouth City Council choose to take now, and then what the response will be from the auditors. Thank you, David, for the information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Mrs. Benny and then Councillor Dr. Mahoney.
Thank you. It's a question really around qualification. So if we get, what I'm sensing in this is there are a range of options, some of which will meet the auditor's opinion that it's fine and therefore not a qualification of the accounts. And then there are possibly other options which may result in a qualification. And I suppose my question is, so what? And that might be a bit blasé, and I don't mean to be, but actually, what does it mean to have a qualification of the 1920 accounts? Does it ripple on beyond that into other accounts or not? Is it just a one-off thing? And like I said, what does it mean?
Thank you. Yes, so obviously, where accounts are qualified, when you move into the subsequent years, if the closing balance in the accounts was materially wrong from the auditor's point of view, then the opening balance will be wrong, and therefore the subsequent year will be qualified. The issue with this particular transaction, because obviously during each year, based on Plymouth's, if we went with the scenario of the 20 years, Plymouth would start to pay down, obviously, that payment, and therefore reduce the disputed amount between the auditor and the council. Eventually, that would become not material, therefore not a qualification. I couldn't be precise about how many years this might last, but it would be a number. It is further complicated at the moment by the fact that the local government minister has written to, all councils with his proposals for dealing with the backlog, some of which involve effectively qualifying audits that are not completed by a certain date. Now, the detail of that is yet to be worked through, but to some degree, given where we are, there's going to be a point in time where some of these things collide, where the local issue at Plymouth might collide with how that national issue is being addressed. So I don't know the answer to how that would be worked through. I suppose in terms of a qualification and what are the broader ramifications, in a commercial setting, it would obviously alarm lenders and people like that. And whereas councils obviously have a different sort of collateral in terms of their value and their estate and their access to cash, which is very different to a commercial entity. Obviously, it could cause some some concern with some of your, I suppose, commercial partners, for want of a better description. And obviously, from a governance point of view, it's obviously not a good thing to have a qualified audit opinion. There are not many qualified audit opinions in the local government sector. So obviously, from our point of view, we'd rather that not be the case. But we do understand that the consequences of taking different course of action does have other ramifications for the council. So it's a finely balanced judgment. I understand the council's thinking on this.
So if I might, I suppose in essence we're talking about the reputation of the council, because if you ask me to name another council that's currently got its accounts qualified, I'd struggle. So from that point of view, so it's very industry centric, I suppose, and it is about the government's view of where that leaves us. So it's reputational, and there are different ways that we can still explore of how we do this.
Thank you. Councillor Mahoney?
Thank you, Chair. It's a question of time again. When I became chair of this committee over 2 years ago, I was assured that the matter was going to be settled shortly. So we are now more than 2 years on, and I'm really not quite sure how much the arguments have changed or how much progress has been made. So could perhaps someone say how far we have got in the last 2 years? Because in a minute we're going to run out of time and we might have to have some accounts that aren't officially signed off. Thank you.
If I may,
Yep.
just to pick up on that one, because that's a good point. So as we were talking earlier, I used the phrase that we've reached an impasse, that one side's got to blink, we've got to do something. So there was a suggestion that we should try and clear it ready to come to this committee. I've spoken to Paul and said if we can extend that to give me a chance to come back to the September meeting, and at that point we need to have had a decision made, because the longer this goes on, it's not just 1920, it is that knock on to all the other accounts that it's holding up, and it's the impact on the finance staff who cannot clear the decks to move forward. So it's in everybody's interest to get it sorted sooner rather than later, but I just I asked for some extra time so that we could get through to the September meeting.
So if there's no further questions, I was going to bring Paul back in. Oh, and Giles.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, I think both Mr. Dossett and Mr. Northey have alluded to the amount of work that's gone on over the last couple of years. It's probably worth reminding this committee that as part of the recommendations that Grant Thornton made at the time, they suggested that we undertook a governance review and made a series of recommendations as a result of that governance review. And we brought the review and our action plan to this committee, and also a series of progress reports on implementing the recommendations. And I think Paul kindly alluded to the fact that, and they did include some changes to the way this committee ran itself as well. And hopefully that gives testament to what has probably been several hundred hours work by both accountancy, legal and other governance officers over the last couple of years. I think the fact that, and I'm not sure if colleagues from Grant Thornton will agree with me on this either, but the fact that a number of King's councils, and in fact even their initials have changed throughout this period, have been exploring this issue without coming to the same conclusion as each other, probably signals the degree of complexity and challenge that is involved, and the decisions that the council does eventually make are of not insignificant import, because two of the options, one is a continuing qualification of our accounts, which I think Paul has properly summed up as problematic in a number of ways. Seeking a capitalisation direction from our government department also brings with it a number of issues as well. And I mean, the final thing I'd say on this, which I'm pleased to be able to quote backwards in the meeting, that the value derived from this transaction is having a positive revenue impact each year as we currently speak. So we haven't kicked a can down the road with a continuing financial burden on the council. In fact, it's a continuing financial saving. So this is probably a big attempt not to sound defensive on the part of officers, Councillor Mahoney, but just to draw attention to a not insignificant amount of work that's been undertaken on what has turned out to be an extremely complex and somewhat contentious issue. I believe, in fact, and we've certainly been contacted by a number of other local authorities. I think there's quite a lot of attention being drawn to this as well, particularly as pension funds across the country face the continuing need to review their assets, and the issue of pension deficit is a material one for a number of public sector employees who are members of those pension funds.
Thank you. I'll just bring Mr. Dossett back in, I think.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of conclude, really, that obviously we will work with officers to try and resolve this matter, and we'll write once we have a proposed way forward from officers. We'll write back to the council for clarity with what if we do move down the qualification route, what that looks like and what the broader consequences are, and probably be useful to share that sort of response with you, Chair, as well, just so you're fully briefed on that. And on that note, I'll then hand over to my colleague John, who's taken over the 2021 audit from me, because I think probably Plymouth's had enough of me dealing with this transaction, so probably time to move to a sort of fresh pair of eyes to look at things. So I'll hand over to John now, and he'll do an introduction.
Okay, thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. I am sorry that I can't be there in person this afternoon. I was certainly slated to be so, but had some news last night that my elderly father was hospitalised, so I wasn't able to make the trip down today. In terms of my role in Grant Thornton, I'm the regional lead partner for our public sector team in the Southwest. So it's always been a sort of our intention that I would pick up from Paul the Plymouth City Council audit. Paul took that audit as a sort of an out of region audit during lockdown, when we were allocating audits to just try and deal with transition of people within the firm, and it made sort of little difference that Paul picked up the audit at that point. I'm very grateful that he did, but it also makes perfect sense now that we repatriate the audit into the Southwest family, and I and my team cover all the Grant Thornton audits throughout the Southwest. In the past, I've audited Somerset County, I've audited Devon County, I've audited Plymouth Hospitals. Currently, I audit Bristol City Council, and I audit the West of England Combined Authority and Bath and North East Somerset Council. So I've got my own personal portfolio of audits in the Southwest, but also the people that report to me also audit the remaining councils on the patch. So I'm very pleased to meet you. The transition from 1920 to 2021 and beyond was a bit more protracted, as you've just heard from Paul, a bit more protracted than any of us would have envisaged. And Paul and I have been discussing when is the best time to sort of effect that handover, because we felt it's important that you've had one focal point from Grant Thornton, and that's been Paul. But as we've got now to the sort of the 1920 position that Paul's articulated, we do feel that it's, now is the time to to be able to make that transition for the audits beyond 1920. And it is important that Paul gives the sort of the conclusion to 1920 and provides that that straight edge on that work. But we haven't not done anything in subsequent years. So we have been doing our work on the 2021 audit. That is actually well advanced, and I've picked up on all those elements and was in fact doing some sort of behind the scenes work already as part of transition there. And I have been involved in the value for money audit work that has been reported, as that has covered the years sort of within my my remit. So that's where I am. I would like to come down face to face, make sure that I meet people, and build that sort of personal contact. I would also offer to members of the committee, particularly new members of the committee, that we would be very happy to do any sort of training sessions you might want, because the world of local government audit is a very specialist one, and it's, I think, always good to rehearse what makes us different and why, and explain some of our sort of our world to you in a more sort of informal setting. I would also like to build the sort of the dialogue with the chair and with committee members, with regular interaction, right? Whether it's, and I'll leave it to you to sort of suggest really what works best for you, whether it's separate meetings, whether it's pre-meetings to the committee, or whether it's me coming to the committee briefings and sort of again giving sort of maybe some informal updates at that point. So I'll let you decide what works best there. I'm very happy to do whatever, but I think it's a good way for us to spend our time outside of the committee meeting. So that's really all I wanted to say by way of update from myself. Very happy to meet with yourselves.
Thank you, John. Councillor Lowry, you have a question?
John, thank you very much for that, and welcome aboard, as it were. I think I read into that you're going to take the lead in response of our accounts going forward from 2020 to 2021. And you also made some comment in respect to progress to date.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether it's included in this report, but I've not seen the progress to date report. Is there one available, and can we be sent it? 'Cause I'd like to understand what has been done to date, what is outstanding, and when that's going to be done, please. If that's included in this
Certainly, we could flesh that out. So the value for money audit has been done. The opinion audit, the financial statements audit, setting aside the pensions transaction matter, has been largely completed as well. So our intention was that we would be wrapping that up over August, with us being able to report an audit findings report to you as soon as we clear the 1920 audit. You know, it is literally that well advanced. So you know, I could give you more detail on that, but I think that's really perhaps the level of assurance that you'd want us to. The work we've been doing there, and we do have resourcing plans to then accelerate our subsequent years' work. But as Paul described, we do need to keep an eye on what comes out of central government by way of the catching up with the backlog measures that might impact on 21, 22. But the 2021 audit is certainly, I would describe as being in the bag, if it wasn't for the pensions transaction point.
Thank you, John. I've got David indicating, and then Councillor Fern.
Yeah, I think it would be useful, Councillor Larry, if at the next meeting we ask Grant Thornton to set out a plan that would show us. So I've made a commitment that we'll come back with some progress on 1920, and then it's 2021, 21, 22. There's a lot of catching up to do, and what their vision is, given that there are noises in the corridors around Westminster, but their view of how they're going to catch up, so that, you know, at what point do we get back on an even keel with 23, 24, or will it be 24, 25, just so that we can give you some assurances to when we will actually be back on course.
Yes, and I think by the time we come to September, we will have clarity from DLUC about what the formal measures are.
Councillor Fenn?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just want to pick up, Mike, when we did the audit scrutiny, did we not say that we'd tie that into, say, a quarterly outturn so we know exactly where we are going through the year? Did we not? Right.
Oh.
Having been here a long while, but both sides of every fence in this room, I'm just getting concerned that, as Councillor Mahoney referred to previously, there is a difference of opinion which I find bizarre given the amount of legal money we spent on this that we can't come to a satisfactory conclusion. I don't understand why that might be, but that's for you guys to sort out. But I'm just conscious that if we are not making the progress and not reporting the progress in the other areas, the benefit of what we're trying to achieve around carrying out audits and governance on our accounts gets lost in time because everyone's changed seats basically, and their corporate history is lost. There are a few of us on this over here who've been here a long while, but I was responsible for that pension transaction, and I still think I've done the right thing in my view. But hey, there you go. But I am conscious that if we don't get these accounts signed off in some form of timely manner, despite the outstanding disagreement that may exist, that all the officers have changed seats, all the members have changed seats, and you just don't get any benefit from the audit. We just spent a lot of money and got nowhere, really. So okay, end of my little moan. But there you go.
But sorry, if I just come in on that, Councillor Larry, I think you're echoing exactly what the Minister is saying in Westminster, that we need to catch up because there is no. What is the value of me presenting to this committee the audited accounts for 2021 if it's 24-25? Because your immediate question is what's happened in the intervening time. So, point taken.
Okay.
And then we fully agree with that as well as an audit supplier. It's absolutely essential that the backlog is addressed. But it is only one element. So to speak to sort of in defence of what we've done so far, we have done the governance work on the pensions transaction and reported that, and we have done the value for money work as a current up to date piece in order to make sure that what is within our gift of control we've delivered upon.
Okay, I'm conscious of time because the agenda's already slipped, but I do think that Councillor Lowry raised a really important point. I think if there's no disagreement, can we now move on to agenda item number 7? Thank you. So this is the internal audit end of year report, and I understand, Brenda, this first time I've met you and been in a meeting with you, but it's also your last meeting, and I think David would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I should do this after you've done your update because you might give us everything that you've been meaning to say over, I think, and you'll correct me because you audit everything that I do, 23 years of audit experience. We'll be walking out of the door at the end of next month, I believe. So I just want to put it on record that it's been a tremendous contribution that you've made, not just to this committee, but the running of Plymouth City Council, setting up Devon Audit Partnership. I will forever be in your debt for the help and support for our award-winning Section 75 with the CCG back in the day. We still remember the party, don't we? Yes. So we won't go there, we'll leave that. But I just want to say, it's not just personally from me, but I think on behalf of the whole of the corporate management team, senior leadership team, and everybody that you've come into contact with over those 23 years, a huge thank you. And I know you've been doing some succession planning, but they are very big shoes to step into. And thank you again.
Thank you. That's very kind words. I've loved my time at Plymouth City Council. Maybe I'll come back like Annette one day as a independent member. I live in the city. It's my city. But no, Louise will be taken over from me. She's in post already, and Louise has worked in Plymouth for a number of, many years now. She's been my right-hand person. Many of the, or probably all of the officers around this table know Louise and know her capabilities, and you and members of this audit committee, you're in really safe hands. So welcome to Louise.
Welcome, Louise.
Right, now back to business. My annual end of year report. So I'm working on the assumption everybody's read the report. Provides a summary of performance against the internal audit plan, which was actually approved by this committee in March of last year. The report highlights key areas of work undertaken. It provides very brief summaries of some of our main findings. And very, very importantly, because it's the end of year report, it provides our overall annual assurance opinion, which I'm actually pleased to report is a reasonable assurance. Now, people around this table who know me, they understand what reasonable assurance is. For new members of this committee, actually in sort of old-fashioned language, reasonable assurance is actually a good standard. There's 4 assurance opinions which are on page 39 of the report, and you will see that reasonable assurance is the second from the top. The reality to provide substantial assurance for the whole of the authority is probably unrealistic for any council anywhere in the country. So, you're good. Let's keep on doing the good job. How we get to that opinion during the course of our work, we actually do work across all areas of the council. We effectively assess the key controls that are operating, and from that work, we provide individual reports to managers, and there's an assurance opinion for each of those individual pieces of work. And on pages 40, 41, you actually will see there are some flavour of the key work undertaken during the course of the last 12 months. But what you may also have picked out on that page, which I'd like to give you an update on, is I highlighted a lack of engagement with DELT services on a planned piece of work, patch management. And I raised this with the Section 151 and CMT members, and this has been progressed, and I'm actually pleased to provide an update that we're back in working with them. We're carrying out that piece of work at the moment. Initial findings from that work is that what we would hope to be in place is in place in terms of their processes and the software tools that they use. And the focus of our work at the moment is to look at where there's anything different, how effectively those exceptions are managed. So a report will come back to this committee, or a short summary on the outcome of that work in September. I think that's really all I've got to say, but it's useful to point out the chart at the bottom of page 41 actually gives you a brief breakdown of the various assurance opinions provided across the year. And the detail is in pages 43 to 55, and you've got a line-by-line summary of each piece of work undertaken with the individual assurance opinions. So, Chair, I'm going to stop now, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Lowry?
Brenda, it was in relation to, I note there's a health and safety audit. I think it was in respect of handheld vibration monitoring, white noise and all that type of stuff. Now, obviously, we've had a few challenges in that arena recently, which may have reflected on us needing to do some more audits, potentially. But I wonder if there's any mechanism that when we do have problems, challenges or mistakes that are made, that we have an opportunity to look back at maybe the audit plans that were carried out in the past and to understand why we may have missed something to allow those things to happen? I know that's always difficult, but that's an obvious feedback we're getting, isn't it? There's a big sort of flashing light problem needs to be solved. Do we do so, or do we have a mechanism where we might reflect back and look at the exercise that we may have carried out 5 years ago to see if we could have done it any differently that may have stopped that problem arising?
Through you, Chair. I think on the hand-on vibration work, what I would say is internal audit are not health and safety specialists. So we don't undertake at any time health and safety audits. That is the responsibility of the HR department and the health and safety specialist team which sits in under them. Where we became involved in it was when issues were flagged, obviously, by the HSE, and we got asked to then just to look at some of the processes that they've got in place. And we've done 3 separate pieces of work, but purely around the hands-on vibration and not any other aspects of health and safety. And that is purely looking at the systems and processes they've got in place to ensure that they can monitor the levels of vibration that operatives are subjected to make sure that the equipment, when it's suitably serviced, that they've got methods in place to record and retain information to show that the council has been monitoring it. Because obviously, as we all know around this table, health and safety can go back many, many, many years. So the recommendations and the work we've done is very much around systems and processes specific on hand-on vibration rather than health and safety in general.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you get to enjoy your retirement, but you're very welcome to come back and join us any stage.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much, Brenda. And I said hello, goodbye. We'll move on to the next item, which is the Internal Audit Charter and Strategy. And this is also Brenda.
I'm back again. Yes, so this is a document that comes before the committee on an annual basis, and we're required by the public sector internal audit standards to actually define how the purpose, the authority, the responsibility of internal audit. And that is actually laid out in the internal audit charter. The audit strategy, which is the second part of the report, is how it lays out for members how we actually work and deliver the service in accordance with the charter and best practice and regulatory requirements. So the document last came before Audit and Governance Committee in July of last year. It's essentially the same as which was agreed last year, and there are just 4 minor changes in it which have been highlighted using track changes. The first change is the year. The second is a past tense. We make note of an additional partner that's joined the Devon Audit Partnership, and there's an update on the qualifications held by members of Devon Audit Partnership. There's nothing else to say, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? No? Excellent. So I think we can note the report. And also, Ross, do we need to agree the charter and strategy? Yeah. So I'll put this to the committee. Is this charter and strategy agreed? All those in favour? Thank you very much. I think that's agreed. Now move to agenda item number 9. This is the Counter Fraud Services annual report, and I'd like to bring in Ken Johnson to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Most of you know me. I come before the committee twice a year now. The report in front of you is basically a summary of the work that we've completed over the past 12 months. And it's basically covering off on, what is really good governance on the part of Plymouth City Council in making sure that they're addressing their counter fraud and risks and threats. It basically provides assurance to not only the council but the citizens of Plymouth that their money and the budgets are being protected and spent wisely. Obviously, fraud is an ever-present and ever-growing threat. However, we're doing our best to protect Plymouth City Council along with its officers as best we can. So you can see from the executive summary, I won't go through it point by point, but the savings once again are consistent with pretty much what similar sorts of years that we've had in the past. The way that we do work is slightly different, in as much as there's an awful lot of background desk work going on, protecting the public purse and checking records and that sort of thing. But what I'd like to emphasise particularly today is a lot of the work that we do, or all of the work that we do, is trying to save that, protect that public purse, is based around the fact that you have a finite resource within Plymouth City Council, and that has to be spent on those that require it, have the best need or the highest need. So with that in mind, obviously every pound that is saved through counter fraud work is money that can go back into your frontline services. So it's not a case of being we're going after people. It's a case of trying to protect that limited resource that you have in order that it goes in the right place. So the introduction for us, as I say, we're part of Devon Audit Partnership. I've worked with Brenda for an awful long time, so yeah, I'm sorry to be seeing her going as well. We do work a lot closer. I used to be obviously your counter fraud team, part of your counter fraud team, and I've moved over to DAP, and yeah, be sorry to see her go, but I re-emphasise what Brenda said. Actually, Louise is very capable and committed to the role. So fraud response and resilience assessment, we decided to, and I'm moving on to item 3 on or section 3 on my report. We decided to go back and have a look as well at some of the stuff that has been put in place within Plymouth, just to make sure that it does you good to review where you've taken the business and make sure that you're on the right track. So we went back and applied CIPFA and CIFAS's best practice, and you'll see from the report on Appendix 1, it's a really, really good response, which, as I say, when you're talking about that combating fraud is a show of good governance, that you've considered it and all those things are in place to protect that. I think it's a really good checklist. I say that it's not unsubstantial. There's quite a lot of points there, and you can't really get away from the fact that just about every item is covered off by Plymouth City Council in the work that we help them do. Integration with fraud and risk management and internal audit. As I say, Brenda and I pretty much work hand in glove. Whatever she finds, I find, and vice versa. So we're constantly feeding that machine that is integrated assurance. That integrated assurance is basically there to try and give you, as committee members, some assurance that actually officers within the council and ourselves are actually finding what needs to be found, and there's a plan to deal with that. The National Fraud Initiative, as I say, is ongoing. Hopefully I'll have some more statistical information for you at the next time we meet, because work is ongoing with that, with the finance team and various other departments across the council. Quite a few thousand matches come back that need to be checked. Some will be low value, some will be potentially a lot more interesting. But it's important to say that biannual exercise also increases that resilience to the Data Protection Act requirements, making sure the data is clean, making sure it's up to date, and that it's only being retained for as long as it needs to. So we still have quite a few investigations ongoing. We've dealt with quite a few allegations. As I say, through the data sort of matching that we do, we're generating an awful lot of work in as much as we can then look at these issues and close them down and deal with them and record the savings appropriately. And I know it's really important, the savings are a result of the work itself has the value. So it's really important that the savings are mentioned, but it's not what drives what we do. There is some further information for members. There's been an awful lot of updates come out recently about counter-fraud work and the threats. We could probably spend a whole afternoon talking about cyber threats and that sort of thing. National Cyber Security Centre, if anybody's interested, come and give me a shout, and I can contact you, get you in touch with those. But yeah, there's a few reports there that basically say the scale of fraud is going through the roof, and as I say, I'm happy to come back and do some awareness sessions with members if that would help, in the fact that as you find financial pressures increasing, this is always going to happen. People are put under pressure in a situation where they wouldn't normally make potential decisions, and they do. As I say, as that pressure increases and the opportunity is there, and they can self-rationalise about what is reasonable and what isn't, I'm not going to be out of a job very soon. Okay, so all I would say is overall, as is usual, because we're working so hard with Plymouth, the outlook it is good, but without that taking our foot off the gas sort of thing, it's an ever increasing threat. Everywhere we look is saying it's going to grow, it's going to carry on. So I think for us the important thing is really well done, another good year, but we're far from finished. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Ken. Any questions? Councillor Mahoney?
Yes, someone has asked me a question very recently about adult social care, which perhaps a few months ago I might have done some in-depth questioning in adult social care. When people are assessed for their care costs, which is of course one of the biggest expenses for the council, if an elderly person obviously is not in possession of their faculties to know where their assets are, and the family have to presumably declare what their income might be from various sources and their assets, it was put to me, it must be very easy for someone just to say and forget that, granny or mother's got 50,000 in a building society account. Who is going to find out? How is it going to be found out? Obviously, it's a criminal offence, presumably, to do that. Some people might actually not even know that their elderly mother has an account. So, it's all sorts of facets to this, but it must be a big area of potential fraud. And of course, it is one of the biggest areas of expenditure of the council and increasing. So do you have any information on that? I'm not expecting a full synopsis today, but I just wonder how big the problem might be in this area. And of course, if you don't know there's a problem, it's difficult to know how big it is. Well, there is a problem, but how big is it?
I would be through you, Chair. Sorry, I would be guesstimating at best, but you could probably say that the national statistics say that between 4% and 6% of budgets are lost through fraud. I think the less control, and without going into too much detail in social care budgets and that sort of thing, they're highly pressurised scenarios, and reviews may not happen quite as regularly as they could, and therefore, yeah, that increases that risk. And I would say yes, there is a strong risk of that, but it's having the time and the people and the resources committed to changing that. Yeah.
But the problem is, if someone doesn't declare it, either because they actually have forgotten or didn't know it existed, or because they're deliberately not declaring, what is the chance of it being found out? At what stage might it be found out?
The chances, in direct answer to your question, the chances of finding that out are very slim. What we would need is, in a similar way that we used to deal with a lot of benefit fraud, it's that someone on the inside has that knowledge and then supplies it to us. The trouble is you can't just chuck everyone in and be that intrusive to everybody, because it's not going to be everyone that's doing it. But what I would say is that there is, and we're trying to find ways in, and you're not the only person to raise this. I say it's an issue across the country. We know it's a huge budget matter, and we know that there is fraud in there. And it's how we get into that, as I say, without painting everybody the same, because it's not the case. But yeah, there are certainly pressures that are perhaps contributing to some of it creeping into that particular department or those particular areas of business. And yeah, it does need addressing. But again, it's the resources and what you do about that. It's not an easy fix, because when you're talking about those individuals that you're talking about, potentially the most vulnerable in society, and if they've got a power of attorney dealing with them, that's great, because that person can sign that document. And if they sign it falsely and it's a false statement, but sometimes we don't quite have that clarity, and sometimes it's someone's just helping out a relative, and do they have any legal responsibility then? It's not as easy as it might potentially first sound. Sorry.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Benny, you indicated.
Yep, thank you. It was a question really around when you describe the savings, is that sort of money recovered, or is it a stoppage of loss? Because I was trying to really understand, is that cash in the till really, or is it actually we've stopped this hemorrhaging and therefore the budgets are more resilient and we can spend it on more things?
Yeah, it's sorry, through you, Chair. It's what we call cashable and non-cashables. So some will be cashable, i.e. if it's council tax, and we found, someone's single person discount is wrong, then that's immediately billable and that person has to pay. If it's a social housing property that we've managed to find an illegal subtenant, so we therefore bring that property back into the social housing register, there's a tariff sort of saving that would say, well, actually the council hasn't had to pay for someone in emergency accommodation. So we would take that as a saving. You're not ever going to see that. What you're going to see is that cost aversion from next year sort of thing, yeah? So we lump it together basically because I could be here explaining every type of, and again, I didn't want to sort of drill down into, it's worth this much, because all fraud needs to be dealt with, but the amount of time that you spend on it, I'm not particularly keen on letting everybody know that.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much, Ken. So we are recommended to note this report. Any objections? Okay, thank you. Move on to number 10, which is the draft statement of accounts. And Caroline Haynes, I believe you're presenting this.
Thank you, Chair. My report attempts to explain why the deadline for producing the draft statement of accounts went back to the 31st of May this year, after a couple of years of impact of COVID. The first year of COVID, it was at the end of August, and then we had a couple of years, I think, at the end of July. So this year was the first year it had gone back to a deadline of the 31st of May. We were unable to produce the accounts by that deadline, and in the end published by the 20th of June. Along with a lot of other local authorities, I think only about 30% of local authorities were able to publish by the deadline. The reasons for the delay are sort of, I've tried to cover in the report, but because of we have to rely more on real-time data now rather than estimates that we would have used when we previously published the accounts by the end of May. A lot of that comes down to the fact that auditors are unhappy with us using estimation techniques and want us to rely more on actuals. So that naturally put a delay into things like receiving data from the actuaries for the International Accounting Standard 19, which we have to do an adjustment for with regard to pensions. But in addition to that, a late issue arose in relation to a triennial valuation that was undertaken in October 22. So we ended up having to put changes through our 21-22 accounts and then flow that through to 22-23. So that, in a nutshell, explains why we were delayed. So, but we published them as soon as we practically could do so. As background, we also have now 4 financial years of accounts which are not audited. So I can't bring to the committee any agreed amendments as yet that we've agreed with Grant Thornton. We'll have to come, as each year progresses, we'll have to move forward with that. And in my report, I also cover a little bit on what the balance sheet is saying, and in terms of our assets and liabilities. We do actually have a positive balance sheet at the moment, and the majority of that is down to the revaluation of the pension fund, which has effectively had a positive impact on the council's balance sheet. So, and obviously you also have a copy of the draft statement of accounts, which have been available on council's website since the 20th of June. So I'm happy to take any further questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Carolyn, please? Councillor Finn?
Has there been, Carol, through the chair, has there been any uptick with regard to, if one was to say, cost of fuel? Has that provided any, with the lowering of the cost of fuel, utility services, etc., has that proved a benefit to the council?
I would imagine so, but I'm reporting retrospectively on what happened in 22-23, so I can't comment on what's happened. That would form part of the 23-24 budget report, which is likely to go to council after the first quarter, I think. So I can't really. This is looking back, and this is the issue that we have. We're having to look back. My team are currently being audited on 2021, so we're going back sort of 3 years on what we're looking at. So I can't comment on the current impact.
Yeah, that was just in respect to 3.12. There were no known events after the 31st of March 23 that would have a material impact. So it was just regard disposal.
Material impact for us would be about 7 million and over. So that's what generally it would be if we'd purchased a property. I know in one instance we bought some Mercedes garages after the year end, so that was because that was over £7 million of expenditure. Effectively, that I had to report on it as a material event, but that's generally what we would report on if something significant had happened, rather than say inflationary reductions and things. So.
David, I think you indicated you wanted to come in.
Well, if there's no further questions, I just wanted to pick up on what Grant Thornton offered during their discussion of the audit, which is this is a very lengthy document. It's very technical. I've been an accountant for too many years, but even I fall asleep halfway through it, and you have to pick it up and work your way through it. So it's a very lengthy document. It's very technical. So any help that Grant Thornton are willing to give, I would grab with both hands. And certainly as PCC officers, we're more than happy to walk anybody through how these accounts work and how, I suppose, how they live alongside the reporting that we pass through council as well when we take the outturn report and so on, and the synergy between the two.
And just to add to that, they can actually provide quite a snapshot in time in terms of what's happened. I know, I think last year and the year before I reported on COVID business grants. So, you know, we pick, it does highlight out some of the material areas and things that happen within the year. So they can provide quite a useful document. And I think something that the balance sheet demonstrates has been our movement from, say, short-term borrowing over the last 2 or 3 years to long-term borrowing to reduce the council's risk of interest rates. And so, you know, that can be clearly seen within the balance sheet. So it's really looking at it. It can provide a lot of summarised detail at quite a high level if you really wanted to know how the council was operating.
That's great. Just a quick question, you might not know the answer to this, but one of the reasons for having to put this onto our website and make it public is that it's open to inspection from the public. Has anybody come forward to date to have a look at it? No.
Not that I'm aware of, no. Not even about trees.
Right, I think that ties back into the conversation we were having earlier about the value of the audits piling up and so on. But yeah.
Councillor Dr Mahoney.
I just ask a question about our balance sheet, because it seems like it's in a lot better position than it was a year ago, because the pension liability has dramatically reduced by about 90% from one year to the next. And obviously that could go in the other direction, presumably in a couple of years' time, but it does leave us with a huge amount of unusable reserves, whereas in the previous year we actually had a negative amount in our unusable reserves. Could David or somebody just give us a brief synopsis of what is represented by the unusable reserves? I would have thought it might have been property, but I think it probably isn't. So is there a quick synopsis on this? It's no wonder the public don't ask any questions.
So through the chair, our unusable reserves are what they say. They cannot be used for revenue spending. So essentially they reflect things like movement in property values. So we have a revaluation reserve. We also have a capital adjustment account, which reflects movements of depreciation and MRP and different things through it. And we also have a collection fund adjustment account, which these are all used for us to reflect the international financial reporting standards on our outturn position, but it's not real money as such. It's hard really. It's not usable for the council's business, but we have to put through adjustments to the account so that we could be compared with other private sector organisations. So it's a means of providing a balance sheet so that we can be comparable, but we're not strictly. I don't know if it's a really hard one to answer, but the pension is one, but that's why we get the actuaries' information once a year, so that they can effectively tell us what the value is of our pension fund assets and liabilities. But it's a sort of snapshot position, and we adjust the accounts, but none of it impacts on the council taxpayer or on the revenue budget.
Thank you. I mean, presumably there's not any direct link between usable reserves and our working balance either. Presumably usable reserves are all tied up or whatever.
The working fund balance is not earmarked, but generally you would find that our usable reserves would be earmarked for a purpose. So they could be put aside for, I don't know, voids, or there was one year we had to put 20 million in the collection fund usable reserve to be able to fund the deficit the following year. So they can be used for budget smoothing.
Thank you.
I would I go back to that comment about we'll walk you through if that would be helpful, but I did hear Grant Thornton say they were happy to do that as well.
Any further questions? Okay, so the committee need to approve the statement of accounts for 22-23, which are attached as Appendix B, and this is with the understanding that they will be audited by Grant Thornton. If any issues are identified by Grant Thornton during the audit, members will be asked to delegate the approval of the statement of accounts to the chair of the audit committee, which is me.
Well, Chair, just would propose a slight amendment to the recommendation, as a committee can't delegate to an individual member, so it would need to be delegated to the Service Director for Finance in consultation with the Chairperson of Audit Committee.
Okay, so is the committee prepared to approve the 2022-23 accounts on that basis, with the understanding that they are to be audited? Agreed. Thank you very much.
Excellent. From a governance perspective, obviously all the reports we've gone through so far are arguably, well, they are in my name as Cabinet Member for Finance. There isn't any reason why I cannot be voting in support of these recommendations, even though I've already approved them to come to the committee.
I'm going to defer to
Well, my
the
understanding
officers
is
and Dem support here, I think.
no. in the sense of, sorry, my understanding is yes, I can do it because there's nothing constitutionally prevents me from being on this committee, which is fine. I just wanted to check, though, from a voting perspective, that is not an issue.
So through you, Chair, Councillor Lowry is absolutely correct. There's nothing in the Constitution that prevents him sitting on this committee, certainly as a member. You do not have a pecuniary interest in respect of the reports. What you may have is a non-registrable interest or another registrable interest. But having you, given that you've raised this issue, we'll take advice, but we'll take you've raised an interest. So we'll record an interest. We'll confirm exactly what that interest is at a later time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And also, we also need to note the audit status of the statements of accounts for 1920, 2021, 21-22, and the delay for the publication of 22-23. Is the committee happy to note that? Thank you. Now move on to the annual report on the Treasury management activities for 22-23, and I believe this is Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. Wendy Eldridge, the Lead Accountancy Manager for Capital and Treasury Management. So I'll be presenting this report today. It's a presentation of Treasury Management activities for 22-23 and is presented to comply with the SIPA Code of Practice and to discharge the Council's statutory duty on its presentation. There are sort of the key points of this report, and it's from sort of pages 213 to 227. So I'll break down the key points. So the first sort of key point is on page 216, which sets out the Treasury Management position with our borrowing at the end of March 23 being 565 million. I should mention actually a lot of information in this report is sort of duplicated in the statement of accounts or vice versa. So let's say there is a bit of a thread between the two documents. Say the balance sheet summary as part of table 1 sets out where the council's capital financing requirement offsetting where it's got its usable reserves, and we've briefly touched on those, and working capital, which balances it back to the net borrowing of 565, which was an increase of 11 million from the previous year. Then moving over, probably at the moment, this is quite an interesting table to pick up on, is the borrowing activity that took place, and obviously some of the rates that you're seeing there have certainly for short-term borrowing will be changing quite significantly through the year. But it basically sets out our borrowing broken down by sort of the different sources. I think it's worth noting, because this will be picked up in other parts of this report, action done to mitigate against interest rate risk, where additional borrowing was taken out through the Public Works Loan Board, and the sort of counter side of that was the risk of reducing short-term borrowing. This primarily was to address the interest rate risk that has come to fruition. There's some sort of amounts quoted in this report on interest rates, where at the sort of start of 2022 we could secure short-term borrowing at a lot PWLB borrowing at a lot lower rate than at the end of the year after numerous Bank of England increases. So the table sets out its borrowing. We've got other long-term liabilities, and this would be liabilities linked to public finance initiatives, PFIs, and other sort of loan arrangements. and then it's offset by its the total investments, which I'll go on to in a moment. It is worth just making reference to short-term borrowing and the average rate. The average rate presented reflects the net impact of the transactions we've put through with the interest rates swap arrangement. So that's part of our accounting requirements to report it net. But it is sort of quite notable that if we hadn't had that interest rate arrangement, our short-term borrowing would have been certainly excess of 2%, and obviously in the current year that's a greater rate again. Taking over the page on page 218, it sets out our various table 3 sets out our various investment activities. Again, not any sort of, well, no significant movement between any of the sort of main long-term investments. Short terms has with money held in sort of banks and call accounts has reduced, and this is partly reflecting the use of the Treasury management of these budgets to fund the Treasury management cash flow. Then the next part of the report I'm going to draw committee's attention to is our Treasury management outturn statement, and that picks up a table on page 220, and this sets out the actual Treasury management function as part of the Council's general fund budget. Sort of the main components are sort of the interest we pay on our borrowing, the interest we receive through investments, and some small loan arrangements, the provision we've made into reserves for the meal transaction, which is the pension transaction we've been talking about, and the minimum revenue provision that we're required to sort of contribute to each year. So that's the main part of that table. On page 221, it talks about the external context affecting the 22-23 Treasury management activities, and sort of the key headlines have been ones that have been well publicised either through this committee or like on the news channels around the global inflation issues, the issues with base rates and the impact of that. So it's say this picks up where at the start of the year the base rate was 0.75%, whereas at the end of the financial year it was increased to 4.25, which is sort of unprecedented from the amount of years we sat with a low base rate. Then over on page 222, this is where it sort of picks up the main where SIPFA codes have introduced some changes over the last few years, mainly around where the authorities are not allowed to purchase investment assets primarily for yield. So this is where the council has changed its capital programme to reflect this. Then it also we talk about under point 43 the other non-treasury holdings, and this talks about the property investments that had taken place previously and the yield that is being generated from those. And then the final part of the report is focusing on our prudential indicators. Now these indicators are actually set early in 2022 and incorporated within the Treasury Management Strategy, which is included in the February 22 suite of documents that are produced for budget setting. And the indicators are there as a sort of a control and good practice on how the council plan to undertake its borrowing and investment. That said, the first indicator, and the one I need to draw everyone's attention to, which is under point 46, is where we haven't complied with our planned spread of borrowing between fixed rate and variable rate borrowing arrangements. Obviously, as I mentioned, this was produced early in 2022. The world changed through 22-23, and we took mitigating action to secure in more of our borrowing long term through the Public Works Loan Board than we planned to, with the purpose of mitigating against interest rate risk and potentially refinancing risk, because we're aware that our with having so many years accounts outstanding, we have got a risk with who we borrow with other local authorities we borrow from, that some of them will not lend to a authority that hasn't got their account signed off. So we took that mitigating action by increasing. I did actually, just for interest, put a little table in the middle of page 224 that just set out the type of borrowing we took out and the rates. Everything with the two transactions with a star were actually long-term 50-year borrowing. So we sort of tried to protect our interest rates at what is now very good rates, and probably double that on the current markets. So that was really just to highlight that one. Structure of borrowing, this was complied with, and this is where it's good practice to have a good even spread of when your borrowing is due to mature. Then on page 225, it sets out our investment principle, and again, that's where we're not investing any monies beyond 365 days. Then under point 49 sets out our portfolio average credit rating, and again that was complied with, and the credit rating is one that's pulled off from data provided by Treasury Management Advisors Arling Close. And then the final one is setting out the capital financing requirement on that page. Then over on page 226, we present the movement in borrowing and borrowing and liabilities set out there, and the operational boundaries that we set with our borrowing. So again, I think operational boundaries in the context of what's happening with other local authorities are a strong one that will be monitored particularly closely this year. And that was so that's the main point. And obviously the final section on page 227 sets out the outlook for the remainder of 23-24, which is just a snapshot of different points that Arling Close have raised with us that I felt was useful to share with the committee. So I'll take any questions before I pass it back to the chair to set through the recommendations.
Thank you, Wendy. Any questions on that, please? Mrs. Bennett, and then...
Yeah, it was just a quick one. Thank you, Wendy. So what I've heard in that is that obviously you switched to long-term borrowing because of the higher interest rates. And I've heard through other channels that actually, whilst we considered the really, really low ones sort of, you know, the common practice, actually we're probably swinging to something which is probably more norm over a longer period of time with the interest rates as they currently are. Are you, with that in mind, and it's going to therefore likely to be less unusual to have them in that sort of higher percentage, what else are you doing to try and mitigate or capitalise on, I suppose, as well.
Well, the way we operate our treasury management function anyway is to actually limit borrowing or linking borrowing with cash flow. So where we receive, say, grants in advance, we're able to delay the actual need to actually physically borrow money. So we're doing a number of things that way. We have the rate swap arrangement, which is protecting 75 million of our short-term borrowing to a very favourable rate. And then the sort of the other angle of borrowing that we can look to mitigate is that ongoing review of the capital programme, particularly where a programme is funded from either corporate or service borrowing, where we can look at sort of slipping programmes or reprofiling programmes where there is a hopefully an opportunity that rates will start becoming that more sensible number than what we're seeing at the moment.
Any further questions? Councillor Lowry?
How do we verify, and probably there's an issue for the accountants as well, how do we verify the minimum financial provision and make sure that's accurate? I'm just picking up some observations from other councils that have fallen over, and someone's thinking the bill is X, you need to pay off Y, when actually it's Y plus 2 type thing. So I'd like to understand the minimum financial provision. And also, I was reading about Newham Council saved £143 million after terminating its LOBO loans with the banks, referring to specifically in this press release, NatWest. And I know from previous administrations, including ones that I've been part of, we have paid off LOBOs in the past, and obviously the interest rates now are not necessarily preferable to do so. But nevertheless, have we been approached, or have we approached either of our banks in respect of having a discussion about LOBOs, please?
I'll break the questions down. So the first part of the question was around minimum revenue provision. So I suppose from the accountability side of it, we've worked with our Treasury management advisors who have created a template, a working paper that we can actively we complete. It's available for audit. That sets out all our borrowing, which we make a minimum revenue provision against when that asset becomes operational. So I think the issues that some of the other councils have come up against is where there have been minimum revenue provision adjustments on the rationale that the actual asset, like an investment asset, will actually increase. So it's not actually, we don't need to make the provision because we will have the value in the asset, and obviously that is a risky strategy, and I think this time's shown has not been a good one to follow. So we do, we have within the team segregation of duties with preparing our minimum revenue calculations. So we sort of try to implement as many controls as we can, but I say it is also subject to audit as our sort of our secondary review, independent review. So that's minimum revenue provision. The other element is LOBOs, and I could see the frustration for so many years with the rates that we were being charged for the LOBO compared to the rates we could say secure through short-term borrowing. Obviously, as you say, at the moment the rates are actually quite favourable. We haven't had any call-ins. We did actually have contact from some of our LOBO holders, so that was a sort of indication that all of a sudden they were sort of interested in us. We have got through Arling Close a tool that we can look at the probability of the organisation calling in the LOBO, and at the moment the majority of our LOBOs are very low probability. We have one that's due to finish in about 7 years, and that one's teetering on a higher probability. We have got the option to review and spread the cost of cashing in a low bill. That right hasn't been exercised as yet. We have got a Treasury Management Board set up in next month, and this could be something that we would look at and report back through this committee as an option.
Thank you.
Councillor Finn?
Yeah, hi Chair, thank you. Wendy. So what we're saying is that because the accounts haven't been signed off, it could in future impede our ability to borrow, damage our reputation or perceived reputation. How long do you see going forward? Would that affect us in 12 months' time, 2 years' time? Question one. And the second one was just over page 226, 531. There's just a huge disparity in, we've got the estimates for the borrowing at 861 million, but the actual borrowing of 565 million, PFI liabilities 225, 119. How do you explain how we clearly overshot these estimates when the actual was a lot lower?
Right, I'll take the first part of the question is around the borrowing and the risk of being able to borrow. Right, ultimately the risk would be contained partly by the fact that we could still approach borrowing through the Public Works Loan Board. So that would sort of maintain a cash flow for the capital programme. Obviously, in a situation, I couldn't put a time scale on things, but as I say, we have taken action certainly to sort of borrow in the current financial year to protect the capital programme, allowing for slippage this year. So we've sort of put a few things in place, and I'd say the backstop being able to use PWLB, obviously if we had to go down that route, the cost of borrowing would be higher, not significantly higher as it previously was between short term and PWLB, but it would be higher. So that would be, it isn't a case we won't be able to borrow and things will come to a standstill. It's just we'd have greater implications to our revenue funding of that borrowing that would need attention. So that was the first one. The disparity between the estimates, and if I take the borrowing side of it, again, the numbers were calculated, say, in advance of the 21-22 outturn, which showed a lot of our capital. So it would have been based on our capital programme and our expected borrowing up for that capital programme. In reality, certainly last year and for 22-23 and 21-22, there was significant slippage due to the impact of the capital programme, whether it was workforce, trying to secure materials, etc. So that our forecast was purely mathematical from what our capital programme was, and then the reality is world events and changes. So that's from the borrowing aspect. We didn't borrow as much as we were expected purely because of that slippage. The PFI liabilities and other finance leases, this is where we were expecting a change with how we account for infrastructure assets, or infrastructure liabilities, and that has been it's been extended. At the time for the council to implement it has been extended, so we didn't. We put in a provision of 100 million, and as an estimate, and we've not needed to rely on to use that.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I'll ask that the committee notes the Treasury Management Annual Report and that we recommend the report to full council for approval. Any objections? Thank you very much. And I think at this point we'll take a much deserved short comfort break. 10 minutes. Yeah, so yeah, back just after 25 past. To the meeting with the report in the public interest about Thurrock. And David, over to you for this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll be brief, but I thought it's quite pertinent that this report came forward in time to be able to publish to this committee this afternoon. So we've all seen the headlines about failures within local authorities and the major ones. So I sort of pointed out Thurrock and Woking as two examples where they've got themselves into financial difficulties through all different reasons. This report says it's in the public interest, and it's not just a report to Thurrock Council and how they repair the damage that they've put upon themselves. It is in the public interest in so much as we can all learn lessons from it. And I know when I did that quick training session a couple of weeks ago, I made the point of saying this is an audit and governance committee, and we can be fixated on the audit side of things and looking at numbers and statement of accounts and so on, but it's also about the governance, and you are a backstop to us as officers of the council. And I said at the time, if as the examples came through from Thurrock in particular, when senior officers start saying to elected members and governance committees, you don't need to worry about that, that's not your problem. If you hear myself or any member of the senior management team or officers saying, don't worry about that, that's what I'm paid to worry about, that should be the alarm bell to put your hand up and say, right, stop there. I need to understand a bit more about that. So the fact that that was going on over a series of 2, maybe 3 years should have set alarm bells ringing, but it didn't. So it is a 110-page report. I put the link in. I will be honest and say, when I started thinking it's 110 pages, do I want to commit to reading that? But once I got through page 3 or 4, it almost became like a soap opera where you had to keep going just to find out who had said what to whom, and the chain of events that got us to where they are. So I would say to you, it is a really good read, and it gives you a rounded view of what can very quickly go wrong if you take your eye off the ball. So I'm not for one moment suggesting that Plymouth City Council are anywhere near being a Thurrock or in that position, but I think what the report sets out as you start reading it is how quickly things can just fall apart and start unravelling. So, I mean, we've talked a lot this afternoon about the pension transaction that we did back in October 2019 and the fact that Grant Thornton requested and undertook a post-transaction governance review, and we've changed our governance proposals around transactions such as that. And I think that is a strength that we have, that we responded and we were open and transparent and came forward. But I think the other thing just to point out from this report, and I won't go through it because I put it in there for you to read, and you can do that, is the fact that not only did things start going wrong, but then as a senior management team, they started sort of deflecting and believing their own publicity, if you like. So I had discussions at different meetings across the country with the Section 151 officer, who was very convincing to me about press intrusion as to the transactions that they were putting through their books, which were unusual, but has nothing to do with anybody apart from Thurrock themselves. And I have to say I was convinced by his arguments, and now when you read back as to how that was all playing out, you realise that there were some serious misjudgments there. So as Section 151 officer, I have delegated authority to do different transactions. If I ever come here and start saying, and I want to increase this level, and I want to, again, that should be some alarm bells to you to say what is going on here. So I would just ask you to read the 110 page report and just see the lessons that have been learnt in there. And I think the other thing that's really important to take away from that is the powers that the government have where you do get into trouble. So the fact that they put commissioners in and have effectively taken the role of the chief executive and looked at the whole senior management structure, and everything now goes through a different management line, just sets out the powers that are there and the mess that you can very quickly get into. So I'll leave it there, Chair, unless there are any questions.
Yeah, Mrs. Benny?
Oh, Giles might want to come in, sorry.
Giles?
Oh, right, okay.
Okay, yes, thank you. I was reflecting because you had talked about this, David, when we had some of our training, wasn't it? And so last year there was a massive national incident that happened around care, particularly for people with learning difficulties, but across a number of care provisions, and it was one of the things that hit the press. And one of the things, so with my background as a non-exec in Live Well, one of the things that my colleagues did was to challenge ourselves around, is there any of that going on here, and test it. And what the exec team did was what they called a peer review internally, and they checked and challenged between the various different teams and set up a peer review process to establish what was working well, whether there were any issues, and what could be done even better. And actually CQC identified that as a really good and what's considered an outstanding behaviour. So I was reflecting on that, and actually for us that was a really positive, it had a really positive outcome, because we were able to get assurance at the board level in that there wasn't anything going on similar to what was being portrayed in the national press, and for that we were very pleased. But also it was really positive because we saw such a lot of good practice, and I did wonder whether actually there is an opportunity maybe between us as Plymouth City Council and another council to do some level of peer review, some level of sharing, to hold the mirror up, be clear about what culture exists. There's a number of points here with recommendations which could form the basis of a check and challenge, but actually from that there can be really good learning, and it could be that actually it's just literally a chance to celebrate and say that we've sought assurance and actually our behaviours and culture are good, and actually we should continue along with that, or actually there may be areas where we could develop more. So I did wonder whether there was an opportunity for us as Plymouth City Council to develop a partnership with somebody else to do this, and then from that maybe also describe in simple terms actually what does good look like for audit and governance here. From that, what is it we should be celebrating? What could we do better? And actually capture it on a sheet of A4. What does it look like, and how do we behave collectively to make sure that we don't have another Thurrock, but we continue not to rest on our laurels, but continue to get better? So that was my consideration, really.
Thank you. Giles?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the feedback, Annette. One of the few things actually that gets looked at elsewhere as well as the Audit and Governance Committee is the results of the Council's Local Government Association peer review programme, and we're lucky as a sector that the Local Government Association currently, we'll come back to the Office for Local Government in a minute, has a sector-led regulation improvement feature. So a year ago and updated this February, a fairly formalised peer review took place at the council, where, just as you described, Annette, both politicians and senior officers from, in fact, a range of other local authorities undertook a peer review, much as you described. Preceding that, and due to some of the financial constraints that we've been under for a couple of years, we also asked the Local Government Association to undertake a finance-specific peer review of the way we were managing our both revenue and capital resources at the time, which also made a series of recommendations. Interestingly, in the Thurrock report, there were some criticisms made in the report before you, where the council had received peer review support from the Local Government Association, but had not published the results, and had also not put in place a response to the actions that had been recommended. So I think not just the taking of advice, but the transparency about the receipt of it, and then the publicity given to the response, and then a degree of performance management that takes place after that are all very important elements of that as well. And I think it's interesting because one of my observations is if you just look at the length of the agenda today, but also look at what you take out of the agenda when you look at the terms of reference of the Audit and Governance Committee, you see that the workload on this committee and its members is really high. We've already increased the number of meetings per year as a result of the governance review, actually, indirectly. So I think an issue for the Audit and Governance Committee to consider, and I don't mean now, but in the coming months, is its ability, without delegation to either other bodies or elsewhere in scrutiny or to individual members, to be able to cover the significant workload that it has, and once again the potential for teaming up with neighbouring councils. We do have a huge advantage. I'm sure colleagues from Devon Audit Partnership also looked at the role of internal audit in the Thurrock report. We're very lucky that Devon Audit Partnership has the degree of independence. I think that slight separation from the City Council and the resources that it can call upon for its joint work with Torbay and Devon as well is really important. And I hope both the committee and colleagues from Devon Audit Partnership would agree that it has a clear voice in our governance procedure, and its recommendations go places. And an issue I was going to quickly pick up, Chair, was we've considered the best value inspection report for Thurrock at the corporate management team, as we do most reports in the public interest, and we've done a little bit of a check against the activities that we have either planned or recently undertaken. So you'll be aware of the external scrutiny review that happened, and you'll be able to look at the Thurrock report about concerns they had about the strength of scrutiny, and specifically in terms with our internal audit. We've also put in place a schedule of where limited assurance was offered by Devon Audit Partnership for a range of work that they undertook last year. We've scheduled all of those reports to come back through the corporate management team as well, so that progress against addressing those areas of limited assurance should be listened to. But certainly the feedback from our members of our Audit and Governance Committee about what's struck them within this report as areas for greater or more work that we can do in this area of governance would be most welcome. I mean, members have probably heard that expression that we're all a small number of paychecks away from the street as individuals. Certainly dawns on me that most councils are quite a small number of bad decisions away from extreme difficulties, and I think that's why the role of our Audit and Governance Committee and the associated arrangements are so valued by the council.
Councillor Lowry?
Yeah, I mean, this report is like nothing that takes place in this council in any way, shape or form. You know, I mean, how someone can go off and spend that sum of money without all those checks and balances in place shocks me, because that does not happen in any way of shape or form in this council. But the basis of what they were trying to do is the same as what we have done. You know, we have looked to buy assets and get a return on the yield from those assets. But we made a particular point of ensuring that any asset we bought was at least in Plymouth's boundaries, or we did amend it to say the Plymouth postcode. And thereby there's a benefit, not just financially, but around the jobs, growth and regeneration opportunities that come with those. And just to put it into perspective, we financially are a lot larger than Thurrock Council. We have over nearly a decade spent some 279 million, which seems a lot of money, in doing that. But those are assets within our city or our city boundaries or within our postcode. We've taken a decade to do that. And equally, we already own £500 million worth of assets prior to those assets being built. You know, we own parts of city centres and business parks across the city. We have a professional management team, property management team that does this already. So we extended their sort of ability to purchase things. Thurrock started nowhere. They had nothing. You know, they didn't have an asset management team. They didn't have any property to procure or already own and manage. And they've gone off and spent massive sums of money. You know, I mean, the 151 officers have made over £500 million without any meaningful reference to elected members. However, there is a bit in here that is relevant to us as a committee, and it refers to the Standards and Audits Committee as they have. In that this stuff that we deal with is really, really complex, and unless you've had a lot of time and experience in dealing with it, you can almost feel a bit embarrassed to ask the stupid question in the room, and that's what we must make sure we can do. Like, well, how did you manage to spend that money? Because, you know, a million's a lot of money, isn't it? And when I mentioned to you that we spent 279, well, that seems like a lot of money. But, you know, why did we spend that? Where did we spend it? What governance arrangements were in place? What checks and balances were in place? And I'd like to think that, you know, given where I've sat in the years, that we do have them. And this report, to me, is alien to what takes place in this council. And I think the Audit Committee should not be frightened to put its boots on and demand either additional information or attendance at meetings to check that some of these things are taking place. I know I'd very much welcome that. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any further questions on the Thurrock report? Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to the COVID grants for business update, and this will be Carolyn.
Thank you, Chair. We recently received confirmation from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or BEIS, that they've completed their work on post-payment assurance for the COVID-19 business grants. For those of you're more than probably aware that we administered business grants from March 2020 pretty much to March 2022. So it was 2 years of 8 different grant schemes that we had to develop, and almost coming from nothing. So I can remember the early days of the end of March where it's almost pressure. We will make payments to businesses, and we did on very early April. But in the early stages, we developed our assurance process as we went along, probably like most councils in the country. And it's really quite reassuring to receive confirmation from BEIS that of the checks and balances that they've done on our what we've administered, so far they haven't identified any grants that were incorrectly granted. So, and that's quite reassuring on a programme where we paid out just under 96 million over the 2 years. 93% of the funding that we received was paid out. The reason it wasn't 100%, where it was discretionary, we did pay 100% of the grants, but I think government probably, there were reasons why we couldn't pay out grants to do with things like subsidy rules and things like that. So where we could have paid more, there were operational reasons for businesses as to why they couldn't accept them. So really it's just for members to note, at one stage I think there was over 50 members working on business grants in terms of the application process and through to the assurance verification, and we were internally audited and got reasonable assurance from that. So it's just really, I think it's commendable to all the staff that were involved in those schemes. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any questions on that report? Okay, so we'll note that. Move on to the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Annual Report. Giles, I think this is over to you.
Thank you, Chair. You may wonder why I'm presenting the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report for last year. Until a substantive head of health, safety and wellbeing is in post, I've been asked to take the corporate lead for this. It's felt we have an excellent interim head of service director for HR who started with us this week, but it was felt, given the importance of the health and safety portfolio, that a substantive director should have responsibility for health and safety. So that will be my role until that permanent post is in place. So for the last couple of months, I've been responsible for the corporate lead on this subject, including presenting this, which is a backward look at our health and safety and wellbeing performance for the year 22-23. Going back to our previous subject about the workload of the committee, you'll notice that this starts at page 351 of your papers for today. You'll also see that it covers firstly the governance and accountability section, and you'll see that the continued application of the governance arrangements for health and safety and wellbeing are in place. There's a health, safety and wellbeing steering group that I currently chair that reviews the framework of activity that takes place throughout the year, which meets quarterly. Crucially as well, even though it sounds a little bit dull, the documentation demands for running a compliant health and safety framework across an organisation as diverse as ours has been quite onerous in the past. So actually the implementation of a document and practice management system, which is itemised in the report, has actually been a very important step forward for the council. It does mean that there's electronic tracking of all our key performance indicators. It also means that there are reminders for all individual officers with responsibilities across the framework for actions outstanding, and it makes it an awful lot easier for key issues to be either escalated or acted on, and that's been a key piece of assurance that's been implemented over the last year, which does take us to some of the key performance indicators around health, safety and wellbeing management. The two that briefly cast a spotlight on today, firstly, the timeliness of incident reporting. Crucial that information is received and acted on corporately. The KPI for this area has been, was a year ago, it was that those incidents should be reported in 6 days. Over the last year, that has been reduced to 4 days, and 86% compliance has been recorded for the year gone, which is, while sounds quite high, obviously incidents are potentially serious on their own, and it's very important that that's why the standard for this is 100% compliance. Interestingly, there's, during this year, we'll be introducing a 2-day deadline for that, and that 86% compliance for the last year would translate into 78% compliance against 2 days. So that does seem like a reasonable standard to hold ourselves to in the coming year. In terms of enforcement activity, there was quite a lot of publicity recently given to the sentencing hearing that took place on June the 29th, where the end of a 6-year story around the council's prosecution by the Health and Safety Executive for hand-arm vibration issues in our street services and frontline services was brought to a conclusion, with the having pleaded guilty in March of this year. This was the sentencing hearing. I think we alluded to this earlier on during the internal audit annual report that I would like to thank Devon Audit Partnership, who did play a role in repeat audits around our procurement of some of the recommended mediation of the issues in terms of fulfilling our compliance following the guilty plea and the findings against the council. This is the end of a long saga. It doesn't in any way reduce the harm that was caused to our frontline staff who weren't adequately protected from the health and safety hazards presented by some of the machinery that they were using. There's been extensive work now over a number of years to address all the issues that were raised during that audit. And I think it's with some confidence that we can say that all the lessons from that episode have been learned and changes to procedures, including procurement as well as frontline health and safety management, have been learned and implemented. Having said that, much more topically, in February of this year, the council was served with a prohibition notice by the Health and Safety Executive, and it was in respect of the condition of they're called push walls. They're concrete assets employed in our waste transfer station at Chelsen Meadow, which were presenting in a hazardous condition, and it was not felt by the Health and Safety Executive that adequate measures and mitigations have been put in place to protect our frontline staff. I mean, the response by the council was quick, and the prohibition notice was complied with within 24 hours. However, an investigation has been commissioned into all the circumstances in which what is quite a serious move by the Health and Safety Executive at the time were implemented. I mean, it's probably worth, I should have pointed this out right at the beginning, that there were no injuries at all or harm caused. That, of course, is not the point with health and safety prevention. There are a number of issues around that we will need to learn on and can be reported here if necessary. They're certainly being considered within our the council governance structures as far as officers are concerned. The length of time it takes to procure specialist items, the degree to which issues were escalated and reviewed, the degree to which postponements in update reports to the Health and Safety Wellbeing Group. There are a number of lessons that can be learned from the incident that resulted in the prohibition notice that will be the subject of a report, certainly for consideration by the corporate management team and also in consultation with our trade union colleagues, and might go further. Based on that, the second key indicator is we've set ourselves is that at least 20% of reported incidents through our system should be near misses. And this is based on the fact that it really goes back to Councillor Lowry's point from earlier on. What do we learn from our experiences in this area, and then how do we apply that in terms of good systems of control around health and safety? And the report says that at the end of 22-23, we dipped somewhat below that target. I'm pleased to say that year to date, that reporting has improved, and now it's in excess of 20% of the incidents that are investigated are near misses as opposed to actual occurrences or breaches. So there'll be a number of recommendations that come out as I've described from the investigation following the prohibition notice. So I will have, mine will not be a caretaking role during my sojourn as corporate lead for health and safety, because there'll be a number of recommendations to implement as a result of the report, and also to both in terms of our operational and strategic risk register, a strong culture of health and safety is one of the key corporate priorities and risks that we need to manage as an organisation. Obviously, it's quite a detailed report, and I'm more than happy to attempt to answer any questions that committee members may have.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, Mrs. Bunny.
It was just a quick question, Giles, about, so you talked about the compliance with reporting and majority of sort of within a couple of days. Are there any themes around what stops people reporting within the timescales?
It's a really interesting question. Buried in the depths of the report, there's a little bit of feedback on that subject, which is there are two issues really. Firstly, actually, the lack of compliance, particularly on the more minor incidents, has been the delay in the recipient of the health and safety incident reporting. So the individual themselves, which obviously points to a key training and development opportunity for the organisation to say when things happen to you, you really need to report them. And then the second issue is around which hopefully the implementation of the new management system is addressing, is people have talked about some of the bureaucratic demands that were previously faced. And remember, this is a bit of a backward look. Prior to the implementation of the health and safety system, there was quite a lot of paperwork to navigate in terms of documentation. So one of the priorities we set ourselves was to streamline the process and also improve the compliance. So if I'm late with an action now, I receive a little email from our management system reminding me of that case, which obviously also goes on to an audit trail. So those were the two issues. I think one has been largely addressed. The other is obviously awareness raising amongst our staff, which goes back to that near miss reporting, that there's still that idea that if something happens but everyone's all right, there's no need to report it. And that's a cultural thing that we need to work hard to say that there's a huge value in reporting near misses.
Lee?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to Giles, it's lovely to see on 26.4 that the catch-all unintentional violence is now certainly more nuanced, and at the VV and VP categories. Can you just explain a bit more about the criteria for the VV and the VP categories under 26.4, please?
Yes, I mean, this is a relatively new interpretation and a new area where we're trying to get into a little bit more detail in this area, and there are published criteria. Well, I'm saying published. We've got written criteria for what differentiates between the two. It's quite a difficult area to define, because quite often there's the reaction of the individual concerned. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're interested, I can certainly let you see. There's a training module connected with this, and also some information that it's based on. And if you're interested, Councillor Finn, I'd be more than happy to circulate it to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Giles. Thank you.
Any further questions? No. I think we'll move on to the risk management report. I think, Ross, this is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware this is a regular report to Audit and Governance Committee, and both the strategic and operational risk registers are also discussed at scrutiny. So just to outline the current position, the total number of strategic risks currently being managed is 23. There is 8 red risks, not 7, as I've identified in the report. One of the reasons I'm not an accountant. The red risks refer to council expenditure exceeding resources, a pension fund accounting as discussed earlier today, the demand and complexity of demand in children's services, cybersecurity, IT supply chain constraints, workforce constraints in adult social care, the SUDS approval body, Sustainable Drainage System approval body, and catered, some risk of financial instability there. So those are the 8 risks currently. Of those, there is planned scrutiny around the council's budget and resources, as you would expect over the course of the next 6 to 9 months as we prepare the budget for February next year. Pension fund accounting is something which has remained a discussion here at Audit. Demand and complexity of children's services is being reviewed by scrutiny, was picked up at their last session, particularly in response to the improvements that need to be made following Ofsted inspections. IT supply constraints and cybersecurity is listed as an item due to be considered at scrutiny, but not yet arranged a date for that. Social care workforce constraints is under review by the Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee. Currently, no further scrutiny planned around SUDS or CaterEd. There is also a new risk on the strategic register that concerns the capacity within our senior leadership team, in particular reference to statutory officers. So we currently have an interim 151 officer, an interim monitoring officer, and gaps in other places. Mitigation is listed on that report and refers to the interims in place and the recruitment underway. I believe that there was a Chief Officer's Appointments panel only earlier this week, and there's due to be another at the end of this week. So that's the strategic risks. There is also, we've also provided the red risk around operational risks. So currently I think it's 111 risks on the operational register. We have done some weeding on the operational register, so that has reduced since last time. There was a number of duplicate risks and some which have been considered sufficiently mitigated and no longer required to be reported. Those operational risks again concern children's trees in respect of some health and safety risks around dangerous trees or old trees or dead trees. Asbestos, data security, recruitment, home working and the school transport budgets are all currently identified on the operational risk register. Chair, we obviously review this every quarter and we'll bring a further review back to committee in September. However, members might want to consider whether they wish to bring in any of these items onto their work programme for future consideration. But that understanding that some of that scrutiny is already underway through the scrutiny function of the council's governance structure. Chair, I'll do my best to answer any questions that might be forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you. So any questions on the risk management monitoring report? No? Okay.
No.
Yeah, it's too good to be
I do
true.
think we should acknowledge that there are a lot of significant risks on our strategic risk register, and forgive me for guessing, but it appears to be more than it generally is under general circumstances, and that's probably not entirely surprising given the complexity of the world at the moment. But I don't think we should be simply sort of great, lovely plan, off you go. There's some significant risks here. I mean, obviously number one is in relation to the function that I carry on behalf of the council, and David and I are currently talking about how we put a more structured approach in place to dealing with some of the strategic overspends that exist year upon year on the council. So these risks need to be monitored carefully, and obviously we made a change last year, which means that these risks are now sent to the scrutiny panels for their oversight, so they can make decisions as to what they wish to call in, and I'm sure we will do the same moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowry. Definitely no further questions or comments. Go on, Councillor Finn.
No, just one quick one. I know it was sort of widely discussed within this committee last year about keeping up to date with exactly what's happening where and when. And there was a general discussion, it may be a recommendation from this committee that sort of we have an outturn every sort of quarter so we can sort of keep track of what's happening rather than sort of coming up to the the audit review before it goes to cabinet each year. It's just a thought, that's all I'd like to put to the floor. No.
Councillor Larry?
Disagree. I don't want us to get into a place where we shouldn't be. There is another committee whose job is to monitor performance. It's not our job to monitor performance. It's our job to do audit in governance. So we end up duplicating the role of another committee, in my view. And the information, of course, is readily available to any of us to pick up and view, and if it has a relevance to this committee, to bring it forward. But I personally believe we would be duplicating the role of we'd end up arguing about how much we're spending on toilets, because that's what invariably happens when you put financial data in front of people, as opposed to doing our job is to make sure that, you know, is the governance correct? Is the audit process correct? That's my view.
Thank you. I think as well, it's, you know, I echo Councillor Larry's comments about, you know, taking this seriously. It is a risk management report. We can't be complacent, otherwise, you know, we could end up like Thurrock. I really, really hope we're a very, very long way away from that. But it does need to be taken seriously. That said, if there's no further questions or comments, is the committee happy to note the current position on the strategic and operational risk register? Okay, thank you very much. So, item number 16 is the annual governance statement, and this is also Ross.
Thank you, Chair. The annual governance statement is part of the annual suite of governance documents you actually see here at Audit and Governance Committee on an annual basis. Essentially, the annual governance statement sets out how we are ensuring that we have proper systems of internal control in place at the council. So the first part of the report, which is from pages 407 to, I'm going to say 417, describes the SIPFA and SOLAS principles of good governance. Underneath each principle, you'll find the guiding documents that we're using in order to maintain our position against those principles. And to the right of that, some examples of how those have been used over the course of the last year. So that first part is very much looking backwards over the 2022-23 financial year. The second part of the document is a summary of the issues that have arisen throughout the year, alongside an assurance statement and plans to address these issues where appropriate. So on page 419, we've included the response from the external auditor review and our judgment from internal audit of reasonable assurance. We then move on to some of the issues that have taken place throughout the year. So corporate peer challenge, Giles referred to that earlier. We've obviously progressed through the action plan. What we've done is provided you a link there to the most recent progress report. The peer review the peer review team have reported a strong sense of the council working collaboratively to maintain the direction of travel, and have been assured by the action plan that we have put in place at the council. The second issue which has arisen is following the Ofsted focus visit to Plymouth's front door back in December 22. An improvement board has been established. That's to provide some assurance to you that we are responding, or the governance structure is responding to the Ofsted issue which has arisen. So a new improvement board has been put in place, and it will work alongside existing governance controls in that space. The next issue which has arisen is around the council's constitution. So throughout the 22-23 financial year, there were several components of the Constitution which we've found to be suboptimal, which has led to some misunderstandings around by multiple stakeholders as to the processes and procedures of the Council. Now, there is well, it's on your agenda following this item, I think, that the Audit and Governance Committee will lead a constitutional review for 23-24. We're expecting to report this back to Council in stages, trying to deal with the most pressing matters first and making those changes to the Constitution as quickly as we can, but we will come back to that issue shortly. We have implemented new arrangements for complaints under the Code of Conduct following the approval of the new Code of Conduct, which members who were on the committee last year will be aware of. We will now need to establish a new standards committee, so that will be an action for us over the course of the next 9 months. And we've also identified issues raised by the senior leadership team as part of our work around the annual governance statement. Each year, we survey our senior leadership team around elements of their governance just to ensure that there are no issues, or where there are issues, those are recorded and dealt with. So there's a few things that we wish to do over the course of the next year, which is to improve the recording of decisions. So this is very much internal governance. It's focused on recording of decisions within departments, making sure that those are easily accessible and held centrally. We have also established a governance stakeholder group amongst members amongst officers to ensure that any changes that we're making either to the Constitution or internal processes are understood and make sense and don't add any additional burden or barriers to our officer corps. We have a number of companies, as members will be aware, in the Plymouth family of companies. Now, the senior leadership team survey has identified a few issues in terms of our recording of various documents. So governance documents in respect to the family of companies such as annual reports, articles of association and so on. So there's a few actions we're going to take over the course of the next year to centralise that. And we'll need to give some consideration to how the current governance structure might flex to provide both officers and members better oversight of those companies. There has been a slight change to the vision and strategic objectives of the Council following the election in May. As a result, we will need to review departmental business plans. That review is currently underway, and we'll expect that departmental business plans to be in place in the next week or so. In respect of risk and performance management, as members will be aware, last year we undertook an external review of risk management, and the conclusions from that review was that the risk culture in place at senior management level was appropriate. However, there is some issues around the reporting and collation of risk within service areas. Now, working with our internal audit team, that will be a focus over the course of the next year, and we're certainly putting into place now some changes to process to make that process easier and less burdensome on officers. So that work will continue over the next couple of months, and when we come to either September or November, we'll bring back a review for the risk and opportunity management strategy. As Giles referred to earlier, we have undertaken an external review of overview and scrutiny. There was a number of recommendations resulting from that review, and we have taken steps to implement most of those immediately. So that covers things like prioritisation tools, more timely production of actions in advance, etc. There was some longer term improvements suggested, in particular the role and status of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, which we will pick up in the constitutional review over the next couple of months. Chair, I think that's all I'll say for the moment. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. So, any questions? No? Okay, thank you for that. So we can note this report. Thank you, Ross. And now move on to the constitutional review, which is also Ross.
Ross.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just get my page. Chair, I think the report, to be honest, is fairly self-explanatory. There has been a number of issues raised over the last year in respect to the Constitution. Some of those we'd like to make some progress on quite quickly. So that's generally procedures around council, the status of the cabinet when the leader resigns, those sorts of issues we need to pick up. There's also we will also need to have a look at petition guidance fairly quickly. Our petition guidance has been in place since 2011 when the duty was first placed upon local authorities. That duty's since been repealed, and there is room for us to relook at that and see what works locally for us. So there's some very clear issues we need to resolve quite quickly. Moving forward, there is a wider issue of contract standing orders, finance standing orders, how those work together, how those are presented both to officers, members and the general public in a way which is understandable and makes sense. Now there's some proposals about how we might do that. It's very important though that this committee is the one that's charged with making those changes. So the suggestion in the report is to refer this matter to the Civic and Constitutional Review Group, which we established back in January 2022. Now, if the committee is minded to do that, we'll speak to whips concerning appointments. What we've also included in that paper is a draft outline for the review. So we'd be happy to take any comments in respect of that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ross. So, any questions or comments on the constitutional review? Councillor Lowry?
Is there firstly a timeline that we're aiming for here, please?
It's going to be an iterative process, Councillor. What I'm not going to say is we're going to come September Council with everything changed. I think it's going to be bit by bit. So the first part, so some of those issues we'd like to know quite quickly, which are at the top of that timeline, we'd like to bring into September. The contract standing orders, finance standing orders will take more work. So it is likely to be January, I would expect, by the time we'll have a draft for consideration at Council. In terms of the other dates, I mean, it's dependent on the availability and of members on that subcommittee.
How do we know if we've got a good constitution or not, as the case may be? Because we can put a bunch of us in a room and thrash it around and come up with some revised constitution, which we may think is brilliant. But I'm just trying to figure out how we sense check it against what others are doing to make sure we're not going off and doing weird and wonderful things that upset everybody in the future.
Yeah, I mean, on the issue of whether we've got a good constitution, I think it really depends who you ask at the moment. Certainly ours is in line and very similar to some local authorities around the country. I think when our constitution was first written in this form back in 2012, it was very similar to that at Oxfordshire County Council. But certainly as part of this programme, we can ensure that we are speaking to neighbouring local authorities or local authorities across the country to ensure that there is good practice that we are reflecting within our constitution.
My other recommendation certainly to members, and would probably want to take it forward, is that you might remember, Councillor Larry, when we revised our Code of Conduct in comparison with the Local Government Association Model Code of Conduct, we did use a small amount of expert consultancy and a very trusted senior lawyer who operates in this region, who also helped draft it generally. I think members found her contribution extremely useful. She also has the advantage of having worked with a large number of other councils and also worked closely with the Local Government Association around their best practice guides. So I think we will definitely reach out, both formally and informally. I mean, I think there's a group of officers within the council who would take a certain pride in not only our constitution being up there with the best of them, but also being more accessible to people who wanted to make queries of it than a lot are. And what we'd like to do is, a little bit as we've done with the Plymouth Plan, we want to create views of the Constitution, which is I am a member of the public, I am a councillor, I am a independent member of a committee, I am an auditor, and then that gives you a particular view of the Constitution, which hopefully will make it easier to navigate, because obviously it has to do a lot of things for a lot of different audiences, the Constitution, and that means it is quite it's easier to access by some than others, let's put it that way. So we'd really like to do that piece of work and take advantage of digital technology now to make it an awful lot easier to search and answer questions, as opposed to just referring one to a paragraph. So there's a degree of, it's going to sound quite sad, Councillor, there's a degree of excitement in certain quarters about the Constitution Review. There speaks the 59-year-old local government officer.
Thank you, Giles. Ross, did I see you indicating?
I think Giles covered it. Certainly the technology aspect is something that we're looking at quite closely. The ability of AI to read and, you know, enable chatbots to have discussions with people, those sorts of things. We're looking at that as an addition to help people understand, but clearly we need to get the content nailed down first. Yeah.
So Larry?
Just moving on to the subgroup. The terms of reference for the subgroup need to come back to this committee for at least the chair and the vice chair, just for them to understand and review what's happening and when, as a minimum, I would suggest.
We have a terms of reference which we agreed last year for the Constitution and Civic Subcommittee, so we can rely on those. The specific terms of this particular review are as set out as that plan. If there's changes there, we can make those. I'm not sure we would require further terms of reference. Wouldn't want to delay it any further, but I can circulate those today. Yeah.
Any further questions on the constitutional review? Okay, thank you. So we, for noting the initial review.
Chair, you just need to agree to refer that to the subcommittee to undertake the work.
So can we agree to refer it to that subcommittee? Is committee happy to do that? Thank you very much. Finally, 1 minute to go, the work programme. So again, this is to have a look at the work programme as set out on pages 439 to 444. Any comments, questions?
Do we intend to need to have a meeting prior to the September meeting for the stuff to go into the council meeting in September or not, as the case may be? Because you previously indicate that would be the case.
Through you, Chair, I think if we can arrange something specific for that item in advance of council, that would be useful if it's required. Otherwise, would prefer to keep to the rather than bringing the September meeting forward, given the timescales of people developing those reports for that meeting.
Okay. Any further contributions or questions? Brilliant. So the work programme's noted. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. Yes, got out almost exactly on time. Meeting finished on time, and it's my first ever one. Thank you.